Happy Wednesday, everybody. Oh my God, what's going on? Hope you're all doing well. How are you doing, Adam?
I'm doing great. Better than you. I feel great. You feel sick.
Yes, I've got a little cold, but I actually feel not too bad. Just my nose is stuffy, so I probably sound even more cartoonish than I normally do.
Summer
So,
cold is the worst. Oh my
yeah, well, at least it's
word.
not like the coof or anything like that, because that really stunk. That really hung on for like a month when I had it. So,
Oh yeah.
well, no, it's just a normal cold. At least I assume it's a normal cold. So anyway, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about the debate street epistemology thing I did with Peter Boghossian. So
Nice.
Reed Nicewander, friend of the channel, did an excellent job. I think he edited this together. I think he does edits for all of Peter's videos. So do you want to just like kind of give the summary of it? Do you want to like watch it? What do you want to do? I mean,
I want to watch at least the beginning of it. I don't know how far we'll get into it, but the summary of it is that basically you give your definition of morality, the height definition of morality, to Peter Boghossian, and he has a big problem with that definition. And then you guys basically argue about it for 55 minutes.
but the question that I have though is like, why? I mean, why does he have such a big problem with the definition? I think we really get hung up on the word rule, and it's interesting to me that morality is something people talk about all the time. They have
Hmm.
very strong feelings and opinions about, and yet they don't really understand how morality is integrated into the world. Like I would say all of our politics is really us arguing over rules that we feel a change in that rule will affect society detrimentally or for the better,
Hmm.
right? So that's like all of politics.
Of course.
Yet, if I just if I think about that long enough and simplify morality down to this simple definition, which we always talked about on the show quite a bit, it doesn't compute for people, even though there is so much evidence in the world that this is what's going on. This is what's happening.
Well, I guess I'll say it here instead of when we started watching. This is what I feel is going on in this conversation is that if I feel like when you tell someone that your definition of morality, you should say two things. You should say
Okay.
number one, that you're looking at this from an evolutionary perspective,
Okay,
because
that's
most
good.
people don't ever think about even conceptualizing morality from that perspective at all. And I think that kind of would like be like, oh, okay, so that's like kind of gives you a context for why you're looking at it through this the kind of the rule system that humans develop. So
Right.
that'd be the first part. And the second thing I would say is I think when you define morality, you should also define moral intuitions for people because I think part of the hang up that Peter has and that most people have with you when you bring this definition is that they literally define morality as moral intuitions. And that's where the disconnect is coming from. They don't know that you have like a separate term to describe what they're talking about.
So that he's defining morality as like the moral intuition that you have to act
Right.
in a certain way.
That you feel like internally that maybe you don't quite know how to verbalize.
Right. Okay. Interesting. But I mean, obviously, if you started talking about murder, they would immediately say, well, that's immoral.
Right. But that feeling is like the moral intuition. And so that's where they get hung up on like the rule part that you're bringing forward. This is why Peter asks all these questions about like, well, can't something be immoral even if society says it's fine, right? Because he's talking about like that you have this internal sense of morality, which is the moral intuition.
Right. Yeah. Well, first of all, on the first one, look, state that I'm looking at morality from an evolutionary perspective. That is instantly going to send us down the Nazi rabbit hole. Like, like immediately people are going to say, well, weren't the Nazis doing the right thing then? Don't you have to categorize that as moral? So
Well,
that
okay.
is the one problem
Right,
with
right,
bringing this is an
right.
evolutionary perspective. Because look, I got into some back and forth on Twitter about this. It's like you can talk about languages and what languages are good for and how languages evolved without ever diving into the content of a language, right?
Hmm.
That's kind of what I'm doing here. I'm saying let's set the content of the moral system aside and talk about what its function is, right? Which I think you can do. You can have that conversation. But so many people, they're like, no, you can't. You can't separate those two things. Like you have to talk about the content, otherwise
Right.
you can't have the conversation. And I'm just like, why?
Right. Well, to go back to the Nazi thing, because that's a good point, and that's something to try to avoid. Maybe
Yes.
maybe the way you should say it is say, I believe humans evolved to have morality,
Right.
because that's not like a Nazi
Oh
thing.
yeah,
Then
that's a good idea.
that wouldn't be confused with what's it called, the eugenics shit, right?
Yeah, evolve to have morality. That's good.
Because I don't think most people don't think of morality as something that like the human animal evolved to have over time for some specific reason at all. That's not even like a thing that enters their mind. Because then once you say that, that's sort of the framework for, well, humans evolved to. That's why, like, if you say that, that gives a framework for why you're saying that morality is this system that helps humans cooperate. Because you're like, oh, okay, so like humans evolved to cooperate and be a tribal animal.
Yeah. Same as language, right? Language
Right,
evolved to help
exactly.
humans cooperate. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Actually, I had a very interesting conversation with a friend of mine the other day where it was actually after watching your conversation with Peter. And I was wondering if, because when we had this conversation about like, is morality something that exists because an animal lives in a community? And I was like, okay, this would be an interesting experiment. What if you could say, like, take a bear or some other animal that, just lives alone essentially, and you could make it as intelligent as a human? Would that animal have any sense of morality whatsoever, or would it just be completely like amoral, psychopathic creature? Because it like why would a bear evolve to have any sense of morality at all?
Right. Well, the obvious answer is to cooperate with other bears. Like as soon as you get the tribal thing going, you're competing on a
But
completely
bears
different
don't. They live
metric.
alone
Yeah,
completely.
yeah, no, I
Yeah,
get that. But the
right.
three bears that can cooperate are obviously going to be, I mean, they're all the individualist bears are going to go extinct pretty quick.
No, 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 right. But I guess my point was, if you could do this, if you could take like lone predatory animals and you could make them hyper intelligent or something, and you could see whether they had morality. If none of them do, that would prove that morality is something that humans evolved to cooperate with each other,
Right.
right? Because you said,
Yeah.
well, all the animals that live alone, they literally just don't even have like, the capability to be moral, essentially. And I was trying to think, like, I don't even know if there are any. Are there any animals, maybe the chat will know, are there any animals that are like, quote, smart animals that are completely like solitary animals?
Yeah, look, it's a totally interesting question. I do think that as soon as they develop some sort of intelligence, they do become social. Like the whales, all the cetaceans, they're all well, I guess ants are but ants are a different thing because obviously, I mean, the evolution takes place at the level of the colony, not at the level of the individual ant.
Right, right,
So,
yeah. They might not even have individuality at all. So,
yeah, but I mean, if you look at like whales and dolphins and stuff like that,
mhm.
even
Yeah, people were talking about
primates.
the like if there's a mom bear, and that's true, and that kind of leads into what I've always said, which is that I think morality evolved out of taking care of the young in the first place.
Oh yeah,
So
totally.
it'd be interesting to compare, like if you could do this experiment, you could compare like a female bear versus a male bear, see if there's any difference in moral sense, and see if, maybe only moral sense comes into the mother at the specific time of having a child, or, how exactly that would all play out.
Right. Yeah, the parental bond is the beginning of the evolutionary process, and then that is imprinted on other individuals aside from
Right.
kin. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Fondue Fujar says octopus are intelligent but solitary, I think. Yeah, octopus are supposed to be super smart. So if they are, that would be an interesting example if they're
Oh yeah.
solitary creatures.
All right, let's watch a little bit of this and see how many people we can trigger with my definition. I think I think it's interesting too that I kept going back to the like. How does he not know that I've worked on this definition? If I can recall it, come back to it. Like
Right,
keep coming back to it several times in this, so
right.
it's kind of funny. All right, here we go. Our best judged according to principles. I mean,
Human moral actions.
no, no. Look, I'll switch places with you. That's fine.
Wow, we have had genuine difference of agreement on every single thing.
Right.
I think this is the only time I've ever had a radical difference of agreement with someone on everything.
So first of all, we gotta give Reed, if he edited this, you have to give him props. He gave you little sunglasses.
I know.
End,
I
right?
saw that. It was cool. Thank you,
for
Reed.
him.
They did me a little dirty in the thumbnail, though. Everyone was pointing out that it looks like it looks like I'm so full of shit, and Peter's sitting there going, "But look, that's the nature of the business. You got to do clickbait a bit, so no hard feelings, obviously." So, best definition of morality is a set of rules that binds individuals into a cooperative community. I'm going over here, right?
Well, first of all, I already believe the guy on the right because he's much better dressed than Peter is.
Oh yeah,
he got like a jacket on. You got a button-down shirt, right?
oh yeah. Look,
Yeah, look at that.
got
Just need some
myself a
better
fresh
shoes.
haircut.
Just need some better shoes.
I love those shoes. What are you talking about? Those shoes are so comfortable. I had to walk all over this campus.
I guess that's fair. That's fair.
I'm not wearing my spiffy shoes.
You're not gonna wear your loafers.
Okay.
Reed? Okay, so you wrote down the best reason you have for...
Reed asked to do this question too. So, and Reed obviously is a fan of height. He's been on the show a bunch of times. Yeah, exactly. He knows what's up. Right. I think secretly Reed is like trying to impress this definition onto Peter. So he's like, this will be good.
For believing that.
Well, I wrote down
Don't tell me what it is.
A pretty good reason.
Okay. No, it has to be your best reason.
I'm not sure that it is, but look, I haven't really thought.
Okay.
I haven't done a hierarchy of all the reasons I believe this.
That's fair.
Like it comes out of moral psychology, like it's based on the work of John.
Don't.
Look, it could have all ended right there. It could have all ended right there. Because I almost said it comes from Jonathan Haidt, right? And I think that would have changed the whole dialogue here. People would have thought, oh, okay. Because he knows Haidt. He totally knows Haidt.
Right.
He might not have read his work, but he knows of him. So, but it's interesting.
Let me guess the reason that you have written down there, and you guess my reason. But I'm going to guess yours first. Don't tell me a reason. Just tell me if this is accurate. Your reason for the best definition of morality is a set of rules that binds individuals into a cooperative community. Your reason for believing that is primarily historical. You look at how morality has been, let's say, operationalized throughout the ages, and you come to an historical conclusion. Is that correct?
No.
Okay. Now, you try to guess mine.
Do you probably have a sense that morality, that people can have a personal morality that is independent of any sort of group or community?
Almost exact.
Okay.
But close enough so that I can reveal my answer. Cooperative community is irrelevant to morality.
Okay.
Because you could have one individual who...
Does that statement just like trigger the fuck out of you? Cooperative community is irrelevant to morality. Oh man.
I mean, it is kind of weird because it is kind of, the comparisons to language are always apt. Like, what is a language? What is the purpose of a language if there's no one to talk to?
Right. There is no purpose. Well,
yeah.
Okay, I guess I agree with you. Obviously, language evolves so that humans cooperate. I would say the only thing that language helps that has nothing to do with talking to someone else is that it's hard for people, even themselves, to understand concepts if the concept doesn't have a term to describe it.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, I would argue that the purpose of having concepts is to like communicate them to
That,
other people.
right. That's obviously the primary purpose of language that we evolved. Yes.
Yeah. But it does, I do think there's some utility to organizing your thoughts around a language. I do think it makes us better thinkers. So, but all of
Well,
that thought is
mhm.
oriented towards cooperation.
I've heard this claim. I don't believe this. So I don't know if you've heard this. I don't know if people in chat have heard this. Some people claim that, and there are people of normal levels of intelligence or they are intelligent people who claim that they don't have an inner dialogue that's verbal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that that's even possible, that you can't like hear thoughts in your head when you're speaking to yourself. That doesn't seem possible to me.
Yeah. Speed readers say this, that they don't have the running dialogue when they read. They just
But that's
kind of,
different though. That's different because that's you
how is it
training
different?
yourself. Because I've taken some of these speed reading courses, I've never been very good at it, but that's like a normal person who has normal thought processes, and then they train themselves to read without like, well, actually, the guys when I've taken speed reading, they don't say that you don't hear the words in your mind. They're saying that they don't want you to do is some people when they talk to themselves, they actually move their mouths or their vocal cords without thinking about it, and that slows you down because you're actually
Right.
trying to like say the word. And they're saying don't if you do that, you won't be able to speed read because you're like limited by how the physical motion.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I don't think you need to move your lips while you're reading, but
Mhm.
I think you have to hear the words in your head. I mean, I do. I've heard people say that they don't. Look, I don't agree with that. Maybe it's just because I haven't experienced it. So,
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's question. Yeah, how do people that were born deaf like how do they like what is their thought process like? I don't even know what the answer to that question would be. So
hmm, that is a good one. They see the sign. They see
mhm.
the signs in their head.
I don't know. Yeah, that is super weird. I mean, I guess if you're born deaf, I don't know. I have no fucking clue. So
Right.
Believes something against his tribe or her tribe, unless you want to say that you want to say morality is arbitrary and there are no moral facts, and that is why you resort to that definition. But you're correct. Let me see if I can guess yours again. Why would someone believe that? Boy, I don't really have any idea why anybody would believe that. If it's not for historical reasons, because you can't even make sense of the notions of morality unless you have people in a linguistic community who support the values of others in that community, and that determines morality over time.
Say it again.
I don't know if I can.
I mean, that's sort of true. That's sort of accurate, right?
What was it?
What he said, it's sort of accurate.
Is it?
Yeah, that more if you're saying that like people evolved to have morality is based on like people cooperating. I mean, he basically just kind of, to be fair, I guess he just kind of reiterated what your definition was in different words. So I don't know, maybe it's not that useful, but
Right. You want a hint?
So if that's not correct, then just tell me what it is.
All moral rules dictate behavior for individuals that minimize harm to the community. Like that's the purpose of moral rules.
All moral rules dictate behavior for individuals that minimize harm to the community.
Right. I use that word dictate deliberately there.
why?
Because it's like a trigger word.
Oh, why are you trying to trigger?
Dictate.
Dictate?
Yeah, dictator, dictate.
Right. Look at you, so sneaky.
A lot of people looks hyper individualist. They're like, oh my God.
See, I feel like on this little chart, you should have just wrote evolution in giant words. That should have been why you believe this. Because that's true, right? That is why you believe it.
I mean, that doesn't really, evolution is the pressure that creates this system, but the system is definable. Like I was defining the system. Like it doesn't work without rules, right?
Right, but like the question is, why do you believe this definition of morality? And I mean, maybe I didn't know. I always thought your answer was my answer, which is that, well, we know that humans evolved to be cooperative animals, so that's why morality evolved to facilitate that process.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, but the technical aspects of how it facilitates that process are important.
That is, no, it is important.
Obviously.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure, right. But I wonder if he had the evolutionary context, if he'd be able to sort of grasp the rest of the conversation
Yeah,
better or
maybe.
differently.
Maybe so. Now it could
yeah.
look, and I know you're probably going to argue that there are things that people can do that are some people describe as immoral that don't do any harm to the community. But I would argue that the reason people are saying that they are harmful is because they perceive that they will harm the community.
And by community, you mean the in-group.
I mean, whoever opts in to this moral rule set. So you're setting up a system of rules. You know, various people opt in. There's rules for the atheist community. There's rules for the Christian community. There's rules for the Islamic community. Those people opt into those rule sets, and those rules dictate how they interact with their community. So there could be multiple communities who have different moral systems, but all moral systems are about setting up rules so individuals can interact with that community. Morality is basically a technology.
And that makes it, so to me doesn't have anything to do with morality. It just has to do with something, a kind of set of rules to make society function in an orderly and maybe efficient manner. Mm-hmm. But that's not really morality to me.
Okay, so what is your definition of morality?
Mine is super broad, because I think when the question was first asked is what was the best definition of morality, I just like what one ought to do or how one ought to live.
Right.
It's independent of any rules.
So what do you base? So look, I agree with you.
Yeah.
That would be a rule. Obviously, there's morality is about rules to dictate behavior. So we agree on that.
I don't know if that's what it's about. I mean, why would it be about?
Well, you just said it was
what one ought
how
to do.
to behave. What one ought to do is.
You don't need rules for that, like because even the rules themselves, when you concretize those in language, you have to look at the context in which it takes place. So I don't know why you would need a rule for morality. I mean, I understand we have a Judeo-Christian. Go ahead.
What one ought to do.
Yeah.
It is interesting that so much of this conversation hinges on not liking the word rule.
I know.
And kind of the implication that follows that. Do you, well, from your because obviously, when you say rule, Peter interprets this as something very, I guess, something more.
Yeah.
Well, maybe something more unbreakable, something like a higher authority, whether it be God, whether it be the police or the government or something, or a church leader. Like there's a rule, there's some tangible thing carved in stone somewhere that says thou shalt not do X, Y, Z, right? Like that's what he's interpreting the word rule. But if you said that morality was like a set of principles that, binds a group into a cooperative group, wouldn't that be like the same thing essentially?
No, not at all.
No, you don't think so?
Yeah, we go through that in here. He tries to change it up to principle, but I'm like, a principle, the purpose of morality is to dumb things down for everyone. Obviously, there are people in society that have 140 IQ and there are people that have 80 IQ, right?
Right.
Morality is basically designed to simplify the world to black and white so that everyone can orient themselves in the same direction. So I don't see, obviously, if you're higher IQ, you're probably going to think the rules are going to feel constraining to you. But if you're lower, the rules can feel more comforting. Like this shows you how to behave in the world in a way that's going to give you success. So I think there's
Hmm.
that kind of difference of intuition there going on. So I just
Right.
like principle doesn't really the reason that I like that look, I really like this definition a lot because it does kind of give you a glimpse into how society functions. And I just people don't like it I think because they have it's the Authority Subversion Foundation. They have they're averse to authority. They don't like the idea of rules, period. And look, a lot of people believe that you can form your own personal morality that is separate from anyone else in the world and that you can live a comfortable life like that. I think that's kind of a myth. Can you really do that? I mean, you're forced to adopt the rules of your community to some extent, right? At least the don't steal,
Hmm.
kill, the
Right.
basics, right? The law, you're forced to. So,
Sure. Um, yeah, I guess this is why though it would be this is why I think when you have this conversation in the future, you should throw out the moral intuition thing because like this is I think the hang up is that most people don't define morality through this way and they define it on this feeling, this innate feeling. And so like they just can't wrap their mind around that it's not the feeling that's morality, it's the rule that society has dictated that's morality.
look, it's so interesting to me that it's the atheist community, the people who stand behind the banner of science that are the ones that usually go down this path. Because look, the the specifics matter in science. They really do. Like if you're
Well,
going to study anything
mhm,
from some sort of scientific perspective, you need to articulate the problem clearly. Now,
yes.
principles does not even come close to articulating the problem clearly. I'm
So
talking about a set of rules, like something, you know, right now there's a massive conflict over abortion, right? We are literally talking about a rule. We are zeroing in on it's okay before 15 weeks, but not after that, right? Like we're articulating the rule set very, very clearly.
well, I can tell you why they have a problem with it. It's so when you were kind of talking about like how morality exists to dumb things down, which I agree with. The issue when it comes to like rule following versus rule breaking, it's not an IQ thing. I don't think all the high IQ people don't want to break the rules and all the low IQ people want to follow the rules. I don't think it has anything to do with IQ. I think it has to do with like generally, if you're more on the right, you're more attuned to following the rules because you're more in the field of like, okay, there's an order, there's a pre-established world order, and if I follow this order, good things will happen and come to me, right? That's kind of like the rule following. And the left is more attuned. Of course, I'm talking about on average. Obviously, things
Yeah,
in
no,
Trump
I
kind of
agree with
changes
what you're
differently.
saying.
But yeah,
Yeah.
the left is more on the rules have brought bad things, so I need to break the rules to bring good things. That's sort of like the way it's kind of viewed. And so when you're talking to a lot of atheists who, not always, but generally, in these conversations, they're going to be more on the left. When you bring up this question about rules, it butts up against their innate intuition that like when you say rule, they think of, oh, all the rules that like the church has put on, communities that have been negative, say gays can't get married,
Hey,
that you
hold
can't
hold on
use.
one second.
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
Okay. Thal for $20. Thank you so much for the $20. Thal says, whatever, Sitch, me and Adam know you have been in the Colombian booger sugar. You live in Florida, dead giveaway, buddy. Listen, I would never do cocaine. Okay, how dare you? How dare you? J Macker Circuit Fly for $20. Thank you so much. Says, damn, who's that good looking gent talking to old Pete? Somebody get
Sorry.
him a podcast. Yeah, that's true.
Sorry,
Adam looks very good.
had a package at the door, but
No, it's no
so
problem.
you were saying rules about
when you say rule, they hear like, oh, the church placing rules saying that gays can't get married, that you can't use condoms, blah blah blah. Like that's how they intuit when you say rules, because I think a lot of people are on the left, so their intuition is like rules should be broken or challenged in order to progress society. And so
It
that's
does.
why it's like this kind of like don't like this idea, because then it kind of sounds like I think that then they intuit from your definition that you must therefore mean that they're immoral people for challenging the rules.
I don't at all.
No,
And
I know, but that's how they interpret it on an emotional level.
yeah, look, and I totally get it. I just the idea that there are good rules and bad rules and some rules are wrong and some rules are right. I guess when you say morality, it kind of has this connotation that all the rules are correct, which is not what I mean at all.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
And
That's a good point. Yeah.
society is really about refining that rule set so that the community can thrive in competition with other communities,
Right.
obviously. And just all of our, like, literally companies fit this model, nations fit this model. Like, we're constantly in competition with other groups. It's so obvious to me. But, and I do look at one of the reasons I think this stuff is interesting is because it is obvious and helpful when you start conceptualizing the world this way. It is a helpful model to understand relations and to
Hmm.
understand politics and to understand like a lot of different things that fit together. A lot of really broad concepts. So,
Yeah.
but yes, I don't. I guess that is he's thinking of a rule as something that is unbreakable. But I don't. What is a better word for something? I mean, I do pitch out guideline, but I mean, a lot of things become rules like social interactions are usually governed by social pressure, but sooner or later, if it's something like murder or theft, it becomes law, like we encode it into law.
I think no, I think rule is a fine word. I just think it's difficult because you get tripped up on all these other things that are kind of hard to work through that people aren't really aware of happening when they have the conversation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as just from a scientific analytical perspective, it would be interesting to be able to model these things like inside a computer. Like you have various rule sets and you give one rule set to one community and one rule set to another community, and you see how those communities thrive or die out. I mean, that's basically what's happening in real life anyway.
Hmm.
I mean, look at the abortion thing, right? Like if we pick 15 weeks or we pick 20 weeks, I mean, it's not going to make that huge a societal impact, right?
I mean, people will perceive it as, so I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, I'm saying, well, my intuition is if we settle for 15 weeks or for 20 weeks, that's going to be a different rule change of 5 weeks. The rule is going to
Right.
be different, right? But I think really what people are doing is they're consulting their intuitions and they're saying, at what point does society start breaking down or suffering real consequences from the rule? Like, obviously, banning abortion, period, would be a very different societal outcome than no restrictions on abortion at all, right?
Right. Right.
And that's what people are arguing over. They're saying, look, this is going to have major repercussions. Now, they don't always say it that way. Like a lot of the gay marriage debate, they want to argue, definitionally marriages between a man and a woman, and this kind of disrespects that definition, right? But really, I think at the heart of it, they're arguing, well, if we let this happen, society will suffer some sort of cost.
I mean, that's part of it. Some people just go, ew, gay's gross.
Yeah, look, and I think a lot of our moral intuitions kind of come from that.
Right.
Yeah. But that's how you come up with the rule set can be somewhat arbitrary, but the end product of society is not going to be arbitrary, right? The society's either going to thrive for 1,000 years or it's going to be over in a short time, right?
Right.
This is why, like, people always want to point to the Nazis, and I'm always like, well, they kind of got snuffed out pretty quick, didn't they? I mean, everyone kind of united against them. So,
So, but was that why are people pointing to the Nazis? I don't understand.
well, because it's very important for people to have good reasons to call the Nazis immoral, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
Well, they
that's
are
why
by
people,
our moral standards.
right. But that bugs people because a lot of times they want to think morality is universal. They want to think the rule set is the rule set everyone should follow.
Right, but then we get stuck into our whole, is there a universal morality if you don't believe in God?
Yes.
And what does that even mean? So,
yeah, that's kind of drifting into talking about the content instead of just the structure of the situation. I mean, you can obviously see that there are different moral rule sets in the world, but people want to be able to say those aren't morality. So that's why it matters.
right. Well, this is at the end of the day, I mean, you kind of get, a lot of this is just the Sitch's law of, how are we defining a concept? Are we defining a word?
Right.
Because we have the concept of like morality, that's your definition, and we have the concept of morality, that's Peter's definition. And sort of like, okay, well, which one of these concepts should we associate with this word, and what's the purpose of associating it with a word? Like, what's the utility of the definition?
Right. Yeah. I get that. A lot. Also, as soon as you start talking about multiple moral systems, people automatically trot out moral relativism, which is a kind of an insult. Like, who is really a moral relativist? Moral relativism has a caveat in it that you can't judge one moral rule set superior over another. And I mean, you can say that there are multiple moral rule sets, and as long as you're saying, yeah, this one sucks and this one's great, you're not a moral relativist, which is basically what I'm doing. I'm saying, yeah, there are a lot of moral rule sets out there. Some of them are terrible. They suck. Like the Nazi rules obviously went extinct for a reason. They're horrible.
Yeah, well, like, I don't know who came up or who's accredited to coming up with the concept of moral relativism first. So I don't know if when they came up with it, they just meant like, well, technically there are a bunch of moral systems and each moral system kind of judge what's right or wrong. And that was it. And then the people that want to do the kind of stupid, brainlet conversation that you're talking about, where they go, well, I can't judge anyone else because of moral relativism. Like, I don't know if that was associated with the term originally or people just kind of use the term for that purpose.
Yeah, I don't either. But it definitely has evolved to mean that. And a lot of lefties, I mean, are legitimately moral relativists. Well, until you bring up the Nazis, and then obviously they're not.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever, like, everyone I've ever heard that like is like brings up moral relativism, they always use it in a very specific way. It's generally someone on the left who's using it, though there are more and more people on the right using it that are like this, well, we should let every country do whatever they want. That's kind of like a weird right-wing form of moral relativism. They're like, as long as they're in their own borders, they could just fucking do all horrible shit they want. But like the left-wing form has been more, or is more common. And yeah, like it's never like a universal moral relativism. It's only towards like, it definitely comes from a P plus P equals R perspective.
It does.
Like, well, you can't judge non-white people because, moral relative. And you're like, what the fuck? Like, this is insane.
You're like, they have a society of pedos. I am going to judge them. Fuck
yeah,
you.
Exactly. Right.
Funny. Isn't that a rule? Like if you say one ought not to lie, isn't that a rule?
That would be
that's
a rule,
like a prohibition on lying.
Yeah, that's right.
So can you think of a rule of how you said how one ought to behave? Can you think of something? Can you think of something that is how someone ought to behave that can't be turned into a rule? If we're disagreeing on that.
Yeah. So kindness.
Mm-hmm.
One ought to be kind.
Right.
But then if one is an executioner or something in a system in which they execute people who've been found guilty in a fair trial by, I don't know, slow torture or something.
Okay.
And they do that by lottery. I'm just making this up off the top of my head, but they do that by lottery and they pick somebody. That would violate the rule, but yet it would still be what one ought to do.
Well, I would argue that there's inside that moral community,
Yeah.
there are different rules for different
Okay.
people.
So you're saying
and also
that,
I don't look the kindness rule I don't necessarily applies in the situation of an executioner.
new claim, people can be kind without following any moral rules. People can be kind without following any moral rules.
Well, going to the executioner, yeah, I think that's a bad example because generally when you're talking about like moral rules in society, it's like one ought to be kind, and then there's like asterisk subsection 1 through 27 million, and it's like all the times that you don't have to be kind, right?
Yeah, of course.
If someone's trying to like attack you and kill you, you can throw kindness away and kill them back. So
Well, lying comes up too, and I do bring up like a lot of moral communities, their rule is don't lie to anyone inside your moral community, but lie like hell to anyone outside your moral community.
right.
We see this in politics when we always talk about the people who know that they're lying, they're totally trolling, and
Yes.
but it's okay because it's the bad guys, right? It's the leftists or it's the
MAGA
fascists.
or the leftists. Yes, right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
People can be kind without following any moral rules. I'm gonna go to neutral.
Wouldn't you have to go to strongly disagree if you're to maintain your definition of morality?
Well, I mean, it depends upon how you're defining kindness. I mean,
The standard dictionary definition.
people can be kind. Okay, so I guess I will go to strongly disagree.
Yeah.
So people can.
You would have to go to strongly disagree to be consistent. Unless you don't value consistency, then you can go anywhere you want.
People can be kind without following any moral rules. People can be kind. Oh, it's Peter's in the chat. Peter, you can come on if you want to come on and talk to us.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
can send you a link. My DMs are open on Twitter if you want to message me on Twitter. And break the moral rules. Like in the situation that you set up, if the moral rule is this, be kind is a moral rule.
So let's do that claim. Be kind is a moral. You can put that down. You don't have to hang on to that.
Okay, good. Be kind is a moral. Well, okay, be kind is a moral rule. Strongly agree. Yes. But I mean, doesn't have to be.
I'm neutral because
It's not morally exclusive.
I'm not sure why we're having a conversation about rules.
So for you, your definition of morality doesn't involve any rules. How do you?
I mean, I'm not sure why you would. I mean, can here? I guess here's a claim.
Morality has nothing to do with human behavior. Just
No, hold on. Just one second. So, one can be a moral person and not follow any rules. Okay, let's do the thing again. So you strongly disagree that one can be a moral person and not follow any rules. And I think that you believe that because to be moral, by definition, you have to follow rules.
yes.
Okay, so I got it. I guessed it correctly.
Look, I used your definition of morality.
Morality about
Morality is about right and wrong behavior. What one should do is a moral rule.
so maybe we have a conflict about what a rule. Maybe our disagreement is about what a rule is.
Okay.
But you want to guess why I am on the strongly agree for one can be
One
a
can
moral
be a moral
person.
person and not follow any rules. Well, you don't define what one should do or should not do as a rule.
Yeah, even deeper than that, though.
You think someone can break rules and still be a moral person?
Even deeper than that. I'll tell you. Rules and morality are independent of each other. rules could help one think they're behaving morally, but do not a moral person make.
Right.
And then I wrote, this includes not having a rule that one will follow rules.
All right. So Peter did DM me on Twitter, so I sent him a link,
Nice.
which is great. Look at this.
Okay, great. Round 2, part 2. Look at this. Okay. Let me read some supers to wait for him to come in. J-Mac, our surrogate father, thank you so much for the $50. Said moral relativism is like buying a car. The feature you feel are more important are what you look for, like safety, space, gas mileage. However, someone might not care and just want what's fast. Society will then have to decide which car to buy.
Yes. Yeah. Sooner or later, everyone has to get on the same page, and that's where the law comes in.
Right.
But look, it's social convention is kind of the testing ground for morality anyway. And there are lots of things that it's probably better to keep in social convention because they change over time, right? But I think obviously the laws around murder and theft are kind of foundational to society, right? So I do think that's why they end up being encoded into law.
Yeah, well, there's not sides that are like, oh, just murder willy-nilly. There has to be like a good reason for it.
Yeah.
Hey guys.
Hey,
what's
up,
up?
Peter?
Hey, I just thought I'd just jump in and say hi. I got a lot of stuff to do today, but I was just enjoying the conversation and the analysis of you don't really find many conversations that go in depth like that on those issues. And I appreciate you joining me and doing that. I think we need more of those conversations. And I do think people can handle it.
Yeah, totally. No, a lot of the comments were really great on the video. A lot of people were very interested in it. So, and look, a lot of people talk about morality and ethics all the time. So I just think it's a topic that a lot of people have a lot of different ideas on, but I have this super like clear idea that I like to articulate, and I think other people find it helpful.
No, I agree. And the problem is that we're really not teaching this to kids in the schools. We're not teaching them how to think about issues. And you can say that you can say anything you want about it, but this is indispensable for living in a society with other human beings. And if we're not teaching it in schools, and the other thing is, what I liked about our conversation is we had such genuine disagreement. And so figuring out how to deal with that civilly as opposed to screaming or that behavior needs to be modeled for people. So I appreciate the fact that you did that.
Yeah. We try to do that on the show all the time too. So, but look, if you've got other stuff to do, Sitch, you have anything you want to say or like?
Well, I was curious. I don't know if Peter listened to the beginning of the stream. I was curious if these two elements would sort of bridge the gap between you guys in understanding, which was that Adam's kind of talking about this, and I agree with him that when he's talking about like morality being a set of rules, he's talking about morality is something that humans as animals evolved to have to cooperate as groups. That'd be number one. And then number two, I feel like a part of the disagreement is that, you're kind of talking, when you're talking about morality, you're talking about like moral intuitions, these sort of innate feelings that people have when they're kind of confronted with the situation. And that's what you're saying is morality is.
Okay, so let's go back to the first one. So I'm not unsympathetic to the idea that our morality is shaped by evolution. I don't think it's true, but I'm not unsympathetic.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah. So
okay, interesting.
Yeah. So I think this conversation comes down to one single question. Are there moral facts? Are there facts that can be known about morality in the way there are facts to be known about empirical phenomenon? Is there such a thing as moral expertise? There's like expertise in playing a violin. Is there a moral expertise? Is it a skill that you can train, that you can get better at? Can you level up at it, if you will? And so if you believe that there are moral facts, then the question is, well, how do we know what those are? So then it's, not to use a big word, but then it's an epistemological question. So I do think there are moral facts. And I think that different, if you want to get weird on the conversation, if you went to other species and other living in different parts of the universe, they too could rationally derive moral facts.
Do you believe in God?
No.
Okay, because I would only see moral facts as being able to come from either God or evolution. I don't know where else they would derive from.
Yeah, that's the problem. I mean, others have tackled this. Sam Harris in The Moral Landscape tackles this,
Hmm.
and he basically says that well, first of all, even the precursor to that is if we can agree upon what good is and what bad is. If we can agree upon those words, then we can set the infrastructure or the groundwork for how to reason morally about things.
Right. Well, actually, Adam hates this, but because this kind of butts into, objective morality. And so I feel like when you talk about that, there's really two forms of objective morality and they kind of get conflated together. I don't know if
Yeah.
someone else smarter than me has come up with a term for this, but the ones that I use is this universal objective morality versus local. And the universal one is like inherent within the fabric of reality itself is some kind of inherent definition of what is moral, of what is good, what is bad,
Right.
and that, usually you can derive some information from it. Usually this, in my understanding, requires a belief in God or something, where the local objective morality is more like, well, if we can agree, like from Sam Harris' perspective, if we can agree what is good, there is some objectively best way to reach whatever is good.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess the question that binds them together is, can someone be wrong about a moral opinion? Or is it all just an opinion? We're in this kind of moral chowder where people just believe in different things, but I mean, is there something to be wrong about?
Well, when you say someone's wrong about moral opinion, what I don't like, does that mean they have the wrong moral take? Or are they wrong about how to get to a moral place? Or
Well, I just tweeted a very disturbing video today of a woman who was tortured
Mhm.
by ISIS, basically raped, brutalized. Her mother was murdered once it was found out she could no longer be a useful sex slave because she was too old. And the woman is, I can't even imagine the emotional trauma. Like, it's utterly inconceivable what this
Right.
poor woman has gone through. And if somebody says, well, that's just their way of doing things, who are you not to say they're wrong? I mean, is there something to be wrong about if someone renders a moral opinion? Can they be wrong? And that's really gets back to if there's a moral fact. Like, if there are no moral facts, then nobody can be wrong when they render their moral opinion.
I I don't think I think we get hung up on looking for like a sort of, I don't know what's the word. We're looking for a justification, I guess, like a further justification that exists outside of our limited human perception to justify something. Because, like in that situation, I'd just say, look, I don't care about, objective morality or whatever. Like that's an action that I think is horribly, brutally, disgustingly wrong, and those people should die. And if they try to throw the moral
Yeah.
relativism at me, I just say I don't care. Like it doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
Why does that
Okay.
matter?
Yeah. Okay. So that's one take on it. Here's another take on it, that people who don't. So I have tweeted this out because I posted another video about a woman in Afghanistan being savagely beaten by rods. And I
Hmm.
said something like, where are feminists on this? Where are they? Where have they been? And I've been
Right.
asking this question for years. When I taught at a university in Portland, during when ISIS had literal slave bazaars, and we know that from the unequivocal testimony of women. We have videos that were snuck out by people who went to the slave bazaars. They sold women as cattle and sexual slaves. There were no protests on my campus. There were protests about the police, whether or not the police should have guns, but there were no protests about that. So,
Right.
but I'm saying that for a reason. I'm saying that because I'm arguing that that's a failure to morally triage. It's a failure, especially on the part of activist departments who are preoccupied with gender and race and sexuality. And if you don't have to take my word for it. If you read their website, their activism or some variant thereof is listed all over the web page, but
Hmm.
yet they don't talk about this issue. Like this is just wholesale ignored. So
Hmm.
so they've failed to. I would argue that there are moral facts and that you shouldn't criticize these things solely because we're Americans and they're not. You should criticize these things because they are objectively wrong.
Okay. I mean,
And
they're not, yeah, I mean, they're not because of the intersectionality, but all
yeah,
the stuff
and
there.
there's something deeply rotten in one's ideological framework if one does
Right.
not criticize that, but one goes out of one's way constantly writing papers, doing pu- public pieces about gender imbalances at conferences.
Hmm.
So there's something wrong there.
Okay.
So, but in
I,
order to
yeah.
even make the case that something's wrong, we have to do away with these postmodern. We if the postmodern claims that truth is all, power knowledge, that it's just all seen through lenses of power, or maybe even the more extreme version that it's all relativistic entirely, and each culture and peoples have their own, like you said, localized moral truths, then we have no standing or ability to make criticisms about grotesque moral injustices like what happens to women in Afghanistan.
Well,
So that yeah,
I
so
would be
this is not
cautious to
just a
not conflate,
theoretical problem.
right. I would be cautious to not conflate truth and morality because I think even if you say that, there aren't a moral truth specifically, I mean, something can be true regardless of the moral claim about it.
Right. So Nietzsche said there are no moral phenomena, only moral interpretations of phenomena.
Hmm.
So like we see this phenomenon and then we import. So for example, if a cockroach scurries across the floor and you jump on the cockroach, nobody in this culture would say you murdered the cockroach. They'd say you killed the cockroach.
Right.
So, but if you're a Jane, they may say, oh, this, dude murdered the cockroach. So there are different cultural interpretations. We embed and then impose morality on phenomena.
Right. But so like, the left, the far left, I should say, they do this sort of breaking down everything into these subjective categories of moral relativism and socialization in order to push for whatever change they want because they're trying to subvert sort of the naturalistic fallacy or the naturalistic
Right.
arguments that people kind of tend to make. So that, I mean, that's like that's how they operate. But at the same token, like just because they want to use some concept like moral relativism in a way that we would both find abhorrent or disgusting, that doesn't necessarily mean that the baseline concept of it is untrue or not.
Well, yeah. Well, that's the question. The question is, are they wrong?
Well, I would say they're not wrong in terms of like, yes, it is our moral system that tells us that it's wrong. The other people obviously have a moral system that tells them it's okay, but so what? Like that doesn't mean that we just gotta sit by and say, well, then we don't do anything about it or we don't condemn it.
Well, there's a
Like
huge
that's the leap that they make.
Yeah, well, there's a huge so what. And the huge so what is that if we have our moral system and they have their moral system, and there's no way to adjudicate those moral systems, then why should we attempt to impose our moral system on others? I mean,
Because we feel our moral system is the one that is right, is
yeah, but
righteous.
they feel their moral system is the one that's right.
Okay, well then we're gonna fight, and whoever's gonna win is gonna win.
Okay, but that our history is littered with violent epics of each side thinking their morality is correct.
Yes.
So it would seem to me to be I don't think that humanity benefits by going forward when that would basically mean power may Plato talks about this in the Republic, he writes about this. That would basically mean power makes truth. Like whoever has the most guns, the most bullets, the most steel, the
Well,
strongest economy
mhm.
determines what's true.
Well, if when we say true, we're talking about like, and from a moral perspective,
Yes.
unless we're saying that God exists or that nature via some evolutionary process has imparted morality into humans, then that is necessarily true, that power does dictate what is like the dominant moral philosophy.
No,
Not
no.
not I mean the ideas have some power, obviously, Sitch. If the moral rule set is like abhorrent, like all the guns in the world are not going to keep it together. Like there has to be some sort of middle ground there.
Let me give you an example, and you tell me if this example persuades you either way. Okay. Okay. So there's a giant meteor hurling toward Earth, and it just scrapes, the tangent of the planet Earth, but it gives off some, I don't know, some like crazy viruses that we've never seen, and you know, you everybody on the planet, no matter where you were on the planet, they lose 90% of their vision. They have diarrhea, chronic diarrhea. They go to diarrhea nine times a day, and they have difficulty walking.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, am I being clear so far?
Yes, you're very clear. Yeah.
Okay, so what word do we use when somebody spends their life, and maybe they even succeed in making it so that instead of people having 90% of their vision lost, they only have 70% of their vision lost? Would we say this is a good thing? Would every person in every culture say this was a good thing?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
Well, maybe not. If you have a culture that's like, oh, the weak should die out so that the strong could live, they would say that's a waste of time. But I would say it was a good thing.
Okay. I don't think you'd find literally anybody who would say, any culture on earth, or maybe even any person who would say, yeah, this is great. I love having diarrhea 9 times a day. Unless, of course, they had diarrhea like 20 times a day, then that would be an improvement. But even then, you'd be calibrating that improvement based upon some standard. So if you can admit that people in any culture, in every culture, and every religious tradition would say that this is bad, then you have a basis to move forward. You also have a basis for moral judgment. I mean, what do you say about some lunatic who wants to make it so that people go from diarrhea 9 times a day to 20 times a day, and he's trying to push people further into that life? Well, you'd say that's bad, and he's a fucking lunatic. So we have some we have ways to look at this that we don't need to appeal to cultures
Well,
or religious books.
but I think, listen, I'm an enlightened liberalism lover, massive individualist,
Me too.
too. So I like that, but you are sort of framing it entirely in an individualist perspective of like, if an individual suffers having diarrhea 10 times a day, everyone who's that individual is going to prefer to not suffer that, right? As opposed to a more group or communal aspect, which is, I want my enemies to suffer that, or, we should purge those that suffer those things so they don't bring down the group, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. In this example, though, everyone is suffering it. I had a guy in class, and I was talking about universal. Well, you said the universal idea of morality,
Mm-hmm.
and he would just simply not concede it, which is fine. Which is actually good. That's what you should do in a philosophy class. You should learn how to make arguments, and so
Right.
I showed him a picture of people in I don't know, it's like Rwanda, and they had a bunch of stumps, so they were chopped off in war. So
Right.
like their enemies went through and just with machetes, and they showed some of the machetes in this picture, and they had like half an arm or what have you. And I said, can we not agree that this is objectively bad? And he said, I could never say this in a college classroom today, but he said, how do you know some greater understanding didn't result as a consequence of them losing their limbs? I said, well, if you honestly believe, like if you genuinely believe that they have some greater understanding, then why don't you chop off your own arm?
Right.
So that's just
But
verbal behavior. So
I see what you're
I'm
saying.
not
Okay.
I'm not buying
Right.
that at all.
Right. Well, I guess I meant when in your hypothetical, I guess I missed that you said I thought you said some population. You're saying the entire planet is hit with the diarrhea
Yeah, the
virus.
meteor comes,
Right.
scrapes the planet.
Everyone gets, okay. Okay. Right.
Everybody
Right.
everywhere.
So yeah, then I would agree that like everyone's gonna be like, okay, if you can cure the diarrhea virus, that's a morally good thing. Then yeah, I agree with that. And
Okay, so we
but this
know
is why I
that.
would say this is, in my opinion, this all comes from the evolutionary, drive to thrive and produce offspring.
Ah, oh, okay. Well, it only comes from the drive to produce your offspring, not to secure somebody else's offspring. But so if that's the case, then then you'd be rooting the sense of morality in these evolutionary dispositions. But you need to be very careful there, because if you say that's the case, then you're saying that peoples who are subject to different evolutionary pressures, different foods, different sun, etc., they're subject to they have different evolved moralities. Now, you mean that
Well,
could be
I
fine. You
mean, I
might
don't know
want to
if
make that
humans
claim,
have
but
been subject to that so long that they've had different morally evolved structures. I don't know if that.
well, yeah, I don't think that evolution has anything to do with morality in that sense. But I mean, it may give us broad propensities for in group and out group, so that we don't kill each other. But I think that it comes back down to the fact that one either accepts the argument that there are moral facts or does not. And if you don't accept the argument that there are moral facts, then there's nothing to be wrong about. And if there's nothing to be wrong about, then every time you pass a moral judgment about things, you're only doing so because of your own situated or localized perspective. But dude, I've got to go, man. I got a lot of
Okay.
stuff to do today.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for coming in, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And thanks again for engaging in that conversation, doing some spectrum street epistemology. You're a super good sport, and I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Let me
Right
know
on.
next time you guys are in town.
Cool, cool. Right on. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you
Take
later.
Later.
care. I guess
Anything you
I'm
want.
not sure, and maybe you could talk longer. If the moral fact is not rooted in evolution, and you don't believe in God, I just don't understand where the moral fact could possibly come from at that point.
Well, I mean, I would I'm looking at kind of a systems level way of understanding morality.
Mhm.
So I'm judging, I'm basically saying these rule sets are like algorithms for structuring society. And if we accept, and it sounds like Peter does accept, that life is kind of the standard that you're trying to achieve, right? You're trying to
Mhm.
achieve a society that has more and more individuals in it that are thriving and living happy lives. Obviously we can say that's a subjective goal. I think that's really kind of the goal that evolution orients us towards. So if you're
But that
looking
makes
at
it
it that way,
objective. If you say evolution orients us towards that thing, that makes it an objective goal, not a subjective goal.
true, yeah, but people will contest that.
Right.
So, because they'll say, look, there's someone could want to orient society towards pain and suffering, and it's like,
Right.
okay, and death and extinction, that could be the way they want to orient society. So therefore, it's subjective. Without getting like too caught up in the objective subjective, the if you're trying to structure society that way, obviously these societies are in competition, so we could come up with different moral rule sets and then judge the societies that end up declining and the societies that end up thriving. I mean, that's basically what's going on in the actual world. I mean, this is what is happening. And I just on the like the power versus the ideas, I just think, like, if the rule set is willfully adopted, I mean, that takes less energy to sustain than a rule set that's forced upon people, right?
Mhm.
So there is, I don't think you can have, I mean, this is an open question whether or not you can have a moral rule set that is just completely adopted at will. Like there's no coercive component at all, right?
Mhm.
But I do think, like, the lower you can get that coercive component, the better your outcomes will be. And I kind of understand that intuitively, right? That's the idea behind liberalism, the idea behind personal individual freedom, right? We're trying to eliminate as much coercion as possible from people, and kind of with the idea that they will kind of produce and thrive better without that coercion. So,
Okay.
I mean, do you understand you obviously understand the conceptual framework here
Yeah.
that I'm putting together. So,
Yeah.
so
No,
look,
yeah.
when he's
I mean, I agree, obviously, but
when Peter is saying it's difficult when you want to start at the level of the individual, but I don't think it's impossible. Like if you want to say, okay, let's make murder legal, and that's going to have a certain cost to society or a certain like thrive metric, right? Any rule that
hmm
you put into the system is going to have an outcome at the end. So if you want to say, well, this rule change is a net positive or this rule change is a net negative, then that's like an objective measurement that you can look at. But I don't know how you do that in the like as a property of the world. I guess it really is a property of the world, right?
right. Well, I mean, this is kind of the problem, and this kind of comes up in the conversation, where you guys talk about like, if a person's alone on an island, do they have morality? Right? They're
Right.
just by themselves. And, it kind of because I believe that humans evolve to have morality. So that gives morality a sense of objectivity because humans evolved to have it like inherent within their DNA and their biology, how the brain is basically wired to function. Then yes, a person who's been subject to all those evolutionary pressures, who lives on an island alone, still going to feel these senses, these moral intuitions, even if they don't really act out in a way that, makes sense
Right.
necessarily. Right.
Yeah, I
But that's
agree.
why I brought the hypothetical of like the bear thing. Because like, yeah, you have incidences of like, there's a kid who's been living alone in the forest and they kind of like find them and then they socialize them and maybe they're always a little fucked up because they weren't socialized properly at a young age, but it still seems like they have some capacity to be socialized where like I don't know if the hyper intelligent bear could ever be socialized at all because they might just literally not have the hardware in the brain to accept it.
Yeah, I get that. Well, if it
hmm
happens slowly over time, obviously, I think the evolutionary pressure would
Sure,
develop
sure,
that
obviously, but then
socialization. But
but that's just evolution at that point. That's why
right.
I guess I just don't understand again if you don't believe in God and you don't think morality comes from evolution, that's fine. But then I feel like, and this was kind of interesting, is that if you don't accept either of those two premises for where morality comes from, then I feel like you're necessarily putting yourself in the trap that Peter wants to avoid, which is like the left wing or the leftist, I should say, the leftist moral relativism claims, that gets brought up.
Right. And you're saying Peter is putting himself in that trap because he doesn't accept that morality comes from evolution.
Yeah, well, I don't understand. Yes, I don't understand how he's saying that like we can look at people who get their limbs cut off, people that are raped and tortured, and we all intrinsically seem to say that's a bad thing. And I'm like, yes, because because of our evolution. We evolved to feel specific ways about specific things.
Yeah, I would put it in the context of my moral framework because it works. It totally works.
hmm
I mean, obviously, I would argue, and this would have to play out to find out if it's actually true, but the argument that I would make is that a society that people are in that worry, this could be their fate, those people are probably going to be less productive than a society where people are not worried that this is going to be their fate. And that's going to have
Right.
uh, some sort of deterioration of the productiveness of the society. Now, if you don't agree productiveness of the society is something important, and a lot of people will say, "Oh, that doesn't matter." I think it's hard to say that, but I think then you could make an argument, like if you accept that that's an objective measure, right? Obviously,
hmm
yeah. And
Well,
these are the
yeah.
conversations. These are the conversations we have all the time,
Right,
right?
right, right, right. Well,
So, yeah.
there's
Go
two things I
ahead.
want to say. That one is I think the division between the moral intuition and the morality definition that you're talking about, is that the moral intuition is the feeling that a human has when confronted with a moral situation. And that feeling is, it's like a generalized, vague sense. Like, you see the person with their hand chopped off or whatever, and you go, oh, like that's wrong. Like you have that feeling. And maybe you can't necessarily like verbalize everything specific about it, but you know that there's something wrong about this. And then morality is taking that feeling and giving it like specific language and a specific concept that you can sort of fixate on and say, okay, well, like don't do this specific thing.
Right. Yeah. I just take it to the logical endpoint where I say that specific thing is going to have some sort of societal outcome if it's
Right.
adopted as the social norm, right?
Of
And
course.
these moral intuitions that people have, they structure a society, right? And then the society that has the people who have bad moral intuitions, those societies get smaller and smaller and smaller and shrink into extinction. And the
Right.
society that has the moral intuitions that work, that form a cohesive society, grow and grow and grow and grow and or thrive and become more successful. It's the exact same thing at the level of the organism. It
Hmm.
is. Like an organism is a collection of single cells, right? The single cells that cooperate into an organism that thrives in the world, takes up more market share in the world of resources and space, like it does, because those cells are exceedingly good at cooperating with one another.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So
it's kind of
it's exactly the same model.
right. Well, I guess kind of Cornell in the chat says, how can you be sure morality evolved directly as opposed to an effect of being both intelligent and self-aware? And I guess what I would say is that, like, even theoretically, if you had, monkeys, a million years ago who were intelligent and they, on some just purely intelligent, pragmatic level, realized, hey, if I give some food to my monkey neighbor, he'll cooperate with me and therefore I'm safer from like the jaguar, right? Like just having that, even if it's like a purely from a non-moral standpoint, an amoral standpoint, just doing it for like a pragmatic purposes, I would argue that that those monkeys will then survive, and thus monkeys that are more predisposed to engage in that cooperative behavior will be reproduced, and the ones that are not, the ones that are more antisocial will die out. And then just through the time of evolutionary process, the ones that are more and more and more cooperative were able to, spread their genes, and that's essentially how the morality evolves into humans and other animals.
Right. This
So
is why you really have to talk about it with the difference between the content of the moral system and the fact that it is like a system.
yes, yes.
Because the system we can really discuss in detail. But as soon as we start drilling down on the content of the system, that's where, I mean, it's like you don't necessarily know until you run the experiment. You actually use the rule in society, right?
Hmm.
So changes to abortion and stuff like that, I mean, until you actually make the change, you don't really know what the outcome is. But it's crazy to think that we don't look for objective measures of the outcome. And when we talk about these things, people do point to different facts. Like a lot of people will say that they'll point to the change with gay marriage and they'll try to blame other things in society on that change. They'll say, look, we did this and this was the outcome, right? This happened, this happened, this happened. Now, I don't think that evidence is good evidence that the changes, there's a direct connection, a concrete connection to the change, but people
Hmm.
will look for those changes. Like
Right.
same with the abortion, right? They constantly point back to when abortion was illegal and they say the outcome was this, back alley abortions and all this pain and suffering, right?
Hmm.
So they are making my case that those moral rules affect the structure of society, and we have to structure those moral rules for a particular societal outcome that is going to be beneficial, well, for both people and for us as a group against other
Right.
people. Yeah. Like the battle between communism and liberal democracy is basically the same exact thing, is it not?
Sure, of
There's
course.
like the Russian space race, the American Russian space race was a manifestation of this, right?
Hmm.
They're like, look, we are two groups competing. We have completely different ideologies. We have completely different moral rule sets, right? Which
Right.
one is going to outcompete? Look, and I
Of
will
course.
argue capitalism destroyed command economies.
Hmm.
Yeah, because of the efficiency.
Well, it's kind of fascinating, and I think Christianity is the reason for this, which is that if you look back in history, morality was a lot more structured on this intuition that humans have, which is whatever society is stronger is like the correct society, the correct moral system. And then Christianity came and it kind of like turned over the table on that idea. Like, well, no, you could still, be meek, be weak, be a slave, and still be more moral in the eyes of God. And I think that kind of changed the calculation, and everything. But people still have that intuition, and kind of talking about the space race. That's the intuition at play here. Is like whatever
Hmm.
society can produce, the outcome is the better society.
Yeah. And yeah, that's a great point because a lot of people will point to like a successful society and outline a society that's completely immoral. They'll say, look, a society could become huge and with large numbers of people are who are thriving, but they hate their lives, right? They
Hmm.
do
Right.
terrible, detestable things. They oppress outsiders. And how can you say that that's a good society just simply because it's a large society? I don't I don't know that there are. I mean, obviously this is like a thought experiment, but I don't know that that actually exists in the world because of the like the power ideas distinction that I was trying to make earlier, because it seems like a society that has a lot of coercion like that
Hmm.
just can't grow in a way that a society where people are happy to be a part of can. So
Right.
people often propose this as a thought experiment. Like they point to like, what if the Nazis won the war, right? With this
Hmm.
super hyper oppressive state that's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and all the, freedom loving capitalist liberal utopias are just getting smaller and smaller and smaller and going extinct. And I think, well, that would suck, but I mean, that doesn't seem to be the world that we're living in.
Right. That's not.
Yeah.
That's not. Well, I think, and maybe it's because there is always this prisoner's dilemma thing where you always have to compete with some other group. And so, maybe, even if you can create a large, quote, productive, society that's highly immoral, I mean, either A, you're breeding in, rebellion in the society, which is going
Yeah.
to make society
Sooner or
fall
later,
apart.
it's going to fall apart.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Or if it can't fall apart, say, you have the robot overlords take over everything, then, eventually that society is going to spread till it runs afoul a more powerful society that views that society as inherently evil and destroys it or attacks it or frees it to some capacity.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly right.
Because there's always a bigger fish somewhere. So,
The size thing is an interesting dilemma because if you do think of nations as competing moral communities, right?
mhm,
You've got Japan, which is tiny, and you've got the United States, which is relatively large. And if you are competing on this metric, like a gross domestic product or something like that,
mhm,
it is kind of interesting that you can, obviously, they don't have a lot of land in Japan, but Japan is kind of an economic powerhouse where they compete on technology, innovation. So
mhm.
it's like that even though they're tiny, they're like kind of still in the game.
Mhm.
I think that's really interesting.
Sure, because they have a moral system that, leads to specific types of outcomes.
Yeah, exactly. At least a
So,
hyper productivity, even though they don't have the kind of resources that America has. America is kind of like the best case scenario, right? A lot of
right.
resources and this this like moral system, this ethical system that we're just kind of gifted by history. It's kind of
Right.
weird. Yeah.
Well, but even it's like, in Japan, it's like, okay, so there's a culture, a moral system that's like very hyper productivity, it's very hyper collectivist, but then it's sort of also breeding all these problems where, people are working too much instead of having a family, the birth rates are plummeting into the fucking trash can.
Yeah.
The economy is having all sorts of problems. They've been having deflation problems for years. So they have all sorts of like, it's like there's always this, the trade-offs, a series of trade-offs, and you have to figure out ways around those trade-offs.
There is. I do think obviously it's better for us to be competing on productivity than how many people we can kill in that other society, right? Competing by destroying the uh destroying the numbers in our competitors.
Right. But that's why I'm
Yeah.
saying, like, at the end of the day, if you're not appealing to God, even if you are appealing to evolution, if you're not appealing to God, you're probably going to end up with, even if we don't like it, it's like that power, whoever's the most powerful country is going to dictate what is the correct moral philosophy. And now people hear power and they think, oh, like military domination, but that's not necessarily true. You look at America, like, and you look at the way that, Western liberalism is essentially trying to change. Part of why I think Western liberalism is so like ultra based is that it's changed the game. The game for thousands and thousands of years in human history was dominate the world through military
Neighbor, yeah,
force.
exactly.
And now Western liberalism is kind of like, no, dominate the world through being a productive economy.
Well, aren't we sort of fomenting revolt by just being so awesome that other people in the world look and they wonder why, why am I living in this detestable situation when I could be living like those people are living?
Well, we're causing problems because there's, people who live in non-Western liberal democracies who, they all have the intuition that people seem to want to go to be that. And so they have to do things maybe aren't just the best things to sort of prevent that shift from occurring in their own countries. And those people obviously hate America, they hate the West, they hate liberalism and everything it offers. So that's like the external threat. The internal threat is, because we've gone in a direction that I think is maybe too individualistic, we've kind of lost a lot of the communal attitudes, the religious attitude, the conservative attitudes that kind of helped people within our Western liberal democracies find meaning in their life. So we've kind of lost some aspect of that. And also the economic conditions have sort of, you know, there's too much income inequality, there's too many problems with housing and other things that have sort of bred, internal problems of their own.
Right.
So, but I don't think that those are necessarily unique to Western liberal democracies. Those seem to be something that every society in all of human history always has to deal with.
The people, like, obviously, we're from a super hyper individualistic stock of human beings in America. So a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people do revolt at the idea that we're foisting our values onto other people by force.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it is fair that if we are just existing in the world and other people in other nations want to they want to transform their society to be more like the American model because
Mm-hmm.
they think it would be better for their society. If 20% of the population, 30% of the population starts tending in that direction, and obviously the people who that threatens their power base, right? They
Mm-hmm.
don't like America because we're tangibly threatening their authority in those societies. I mean, I think that's the best case scenario, right?
Sure.
We're transforming them from within. That's
Yeah, of
fair.
course. Of
Yeah.
course. Right.
So,
Well, I
but
think that
once
kind of goes back to what Peter was saying about how, like, the moral fact seems to be that people, I think this is based on evolution, people want to live lives where they have control over their own destiny, where they can get married, have children, that they can do things that they view as productive. You know, they want to have some level of freedoms that Western liberal democracies tend to provide.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, they want freedom and opportunity. They want their kids to live a better life than they lived.
Right, because like if it wasn't something that seemed to be pretty innate in human beings, I don't, you know, the countries that don't have that, they wouldn't really have to keep stamping down, you know, the spirit of rebellion, right? That's sort
Right.
of against that is against the current order of things.
Yeah, American society has kind of found a way to use that spirit of rebellion in a cycle that
Mhm.
is healthy, I think, for our society. Because obviously, we change, our culture changes over time in a way that's kind of productive, right?
Right, right.
Anyway, interesting conversation. You want to read some super chats? And
Yes, yes,
it's nice of Peter to join in. So,
it was. It was. The Red Don Batman for 16 months says, "Hail to Adam for doing a great job on the debate." That's true. You did a great
yeah,
job.
thank you.
Become the Knight for $10. Thank you so much. Says I can't hang out and watch this live today. Got to do work on my own stream, but we'll come back to this later. Morality is the foundation for any reason y'all's show matters. Much love. Great job, Adam.
Yeah, thanks.
There you go. Mr. Ubercross for $10 says, apparently orangutans live a primarily solitary life. Really? That's interesting. I would
Wow.
wonder though, where, you know, in sort of devising the thought experiment, you would have to get an animal that didn't of like, I don't know if whatever orangutans evolved from were social or solitary creatures, because obviously that would affect the thought experiment too. Because they'd still have some level of latent programming if they evolved from something that was a communal species and became a non-communal species.
Yeah, the the goal would be to convince Peter, I guess, that ethics evolved for this purpose, even though that would be separate from what the what ethics are now, right?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
hard. Like I just like ethics. I just think the language comparison is important here. Like I don't think he would say, "Oh, language didn't evolve," right? Language
Mm-hmm.
isn't from evolution.
Right.
What is the hurdle for ethics?
Well, wait, I mean, obviously language, well, you would say, yeah, like the specific language we have is not like English. We didn't evolve to speak English, but we evolved to speak some kind of language. We evolved to obviously like the way that our tongues and vocal cords and our mouths have this capacity for speech that most other animals don't have.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the
So,
same exact thing.
right. So, yeah, we didn't evolve to speak English, but we evolved to speak something,
Yeah, we
to
should have
speak a
asked like
language.
how ethics came into existence then.
Right, right.
Because it did, obviously it exists, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was the process?
Right. Kern for 22 months says a good retort to the Nazi thing. Just remind them moral pluralism is not moral relativism. P.S. I finished TRM just before the conversation, so great timing.
The Righteous Mind.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, that is great timing. That's a great book. Yeah.
Yeah, moral pluralism is the idea that there are many different moral values that are equally valid and may conflict with each other.
Yeah, that is good.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even
Yeah.
know that was a thing. Yeah. So now I can just say I'm a moral pluralist, not a moral relativist. That's good.
Mm-hmm. Right. Hmm. RBGH fan for $5 says, isn't morality based on groups of people or systems? Just moral relativism? No,
No. Yeah.
no. So, well, I guess it depends how you define moral relativism specifically. So, Nolan Game for $5 says humans can cooperate with other humans without tribal bonds. Strangers can work with strangers, which I don't think other animals can do. So it's true, humans can cooperate with other humans without tribal bonds, but the question that I ask is, well, why, right? Like, and I guess this goes to my sense of morality. I believe that I believe that morality evolved originally from caring for the young.
Yep.
And then basically animals, that concept of taking care of your young, it kind of can spread to, well, now you take care of your parents. Now you take care of your uncle, your nephew. Now you take care of your friends and your neighbors, right? That's all it is. It's just taking care of the feeling of wanting to take care of your young spreading to other people around you. And we're like humans have a capacity, especially depending on what moral philosophy you stem from. Like if you believe in individualistic liberalism, then yeah, you can see another human somewhere. But actually, I think I disagree with your framing, because I would say, okay, if I see a human who's not American, right? And I see them like, they need someone to call an ambulance or something, they hurt themselves. I run over and call the ambulance, right? And you say, well, you're cooperating with other human outside their tribal bonds. I'd say, no, I'm not, because I'm viewing all of humans as part of a tribe, essentially. I'm just,
Yeah.
and that's what like liberalism, that's what a lot of these moral systems do, is they just broaden what the tribe is that you exist within. So,
True.
Drew the Dogma for $2 says the morality is what undergirds the rule.
Yes.
Lord Cameron for 9 months says, check out Lawrence Kohlberg's Stage of Moral Development. I think you two might be talking stage 5 and Peter stage 6, but it's been a while since psychology.
Yeah, I
think we have
know Lawrence Kohlberg. Yeah, definitely.
Right. Yeah, avoiding punishment, self-interest, good boy attitude, law and order, social contract, principle. Yeah. I think I read that one. Thal for $20 says shameless self-promotion playing Wukong. Adam, check out the art and graphics. It's amazing. Storyline is good too. They did a great job on showing a foreign culture, myth, and legend. Disney should take notes.
So it's
Yeah,
cool, huh?
I've heard a lot of people saying good things about Wukong. So I don't know what system it's on or if it's on a computer, but
Wukong. Looks pretty cool.
Mr. Ubercross, thanks so much for the $20. Says, I feel like law is not a moral system. Law is the bare minimum for conduct. Ethics are a subgroup belief of good conduct. Morals are my view of what I need to do to be good. Each category is more granular than the last. I mean, I would agree that law is not a one-for-one moral system. Law is sort of the way in which we try to deal with the complexities of a large-scale society judging moral questions, if that makes
Right.
sense. So that's what I'd say law is. So obviously law has a lot to do with morality, but it's not a one-for-one stand-in for morality.
Is there a purpose of making a law that doesn't affect social interactions between people? Because I
Say that
just
again?
is there a purpose of making a law that doesn't govern the social interactions of people? It seems like all law is about the social interactions of people. Like you're making something, even things as mundane as like building code. You're like, this code needs to be this way because this building will be safer and someone in the future will help them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, and when I think of morality, I just think it's the rules that govern social interaction. So, and rule is just kind of like a way to say everything, just to kind of cover everything from law to just social interaction.
Well, in
which
terms of
is
like
like
it
shaking
depends how you
hands. I don't know.
define
Social
social
convention. That's it.
depends how you define social interaction, because like, okay, like if you had a society said it's against the law to masturbate, right,
Mm-hmm.
by yourself, You know, is
Yes.
that a social interaction?
I mean, yeah, no, obviously that's not a social interaction. Yes.
But I agree, it's not social interaction. But then you have the question of, well, why is that the law? And the law is going to be
Well,
based on
wait,
some kind of perceived harm, right? That the action
Mhm.
causes to the individual.
So, I mean, some masturbation, I guess, is a social interaction because if you're thinking about other people or fantasizing about other people, there is kind of a social interaction there. So,
Well, you
I
could
mean, it
have
might
it.
be tough to masturbate without some sort of social interaction,
Well,
actually.
okay,
Now
let's
that
say
I
like
think about it.
right. Let's say you have a society where that's outlawed masturbation. There could be multiple reasons
Mhm.
for it. Maybe one society says you can't masturbate because you're thinking of another person without their consent. So, I mean, I guess you
Right.
technically could masturbate as long as you're thinking of nothing, which would be pretty, not great to do, right? So
Right. Well, and
that could
then
be
there's
one
other
reason.
societies that are saying, look, you can't waste your masturbation energy. You should be out trying to reproduce and have babies to form
Right,
more people for the society. So there is
right.
kind of a social interaction to
There
why
could
they're
be, right. But
governing the
then
rules around masturbation.
you could say like, okay, it's against the law to masturbate because it's an immoral action, and if you do so, you'll go to hell.
Well, that's dumbing it down for the other people so they don't have to give them this long explanation about how, well, there is, right?
Right, but even then, it's like it kind of goes back to the question that and you bring this up in the debate or the conversation with Peter Boghossian about if you believe in God, when you're on the island alone, the moral community, you can never be outside the moral community because God is always watching, right? You're always part
Right.
of a moral community if you believe in God.
Hmm. Yeah. I
Stock for
do.
$2
A lot of
says,
people do have problems with the fact that the rules govern social interaction, though, which I don't know why that triggers people, but whatever.
I think it's what I said about the left versus right wing intuitions.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is a good point.
Stock for $2 says, what if we need less? Oh, we have more morality and lessality. Oh, very funny. I was like, what? What if we need lessality? Yeah, exactly.
That'd be
Thank you, Mr.
great.
President, for 1 month. Drew the Dogman for $5 says it's always better to give a hungry man a sandwich than kick a baby in the face. Now
True.
well, wait a minute. What if? All right, hold on. What if that hungry man is the genetic clone of Hitler? And if you give him that sandwich, he's really like a Mogwai, and he'll start shooting off more little Hitler clones because it's after midnight. And what if that baby is a Hitler baby and you want to kick
Yeah,
it in the face so
that's
that
what
it
I
doesn't
was.
grow up? Okay.
That's what I was thinking. What if that's baby Hitler?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not kicking no baby in the face,
I'm
even if
kicking
it is
baby
baby.
Hitler. Yes. Stug for $5 says morals are somewhat arbitrary, but they are born of evolved impulses. Reason allows us to train ourselves to apply morality to more or fewer things. Yeah, I think I agree with that 100. I mean, I don't know if I'd use the word. I know you said somewhat arbitrary. I would be a little cautious to use that language, but I do agree, I think, with everything you said.
Yeah, I don't. If moral systems are to foster cooperation, I don't think they can be simply arbitrary because certain rules will facilitate cooperation better than other rules.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, you can't just pick any rules and say, oh, these are going to be our rules, the rules of our society.
Right. J Macker Circuit 5 for $10 says, no, you'd have some dumbasses say you're going to destroy the diarrhea identity. There you go. It's true.
Oh my God, that's so true.
The copers would be mad. Brian for $5 says it can come from the interaction between us and the world around us. In other words, between the interaction between evolution and nature. Yeah, but I would say my position is that if anything that a human is capable of doing, anything that a human has the hardware to accomplish, if you don't believe in God or a metaphysical reality, the hardware has to be granted to us via evolution. Yes, the software of maybe the fine tuning of what that morality or that moral rules is not strictly evolutionary, but it's got to be based on things that on the hardware that evolution granted us, essentially. PC for $5 says, could moral facts be like could be like universal constants? Example, pi or e. The universe does contain fundamental features, but unclear how it would work with morals. I think it could only be a moral fact through evolution. I don't think it could be like a mathematical fact like pi or something like that. So,
If you accept that human life is a standard for morality, I do think obviously people focus on murder because that's the closest you can get to some sort of universal constant. Obviously, if you're trying to form a community, that community killing one another is going to be super caustic to keeping that community together. So prohibition against it seems obvious. And I mean, most societies do have some sort of prohibition against killing one another.
right. Well, I really, that's why I really like the book Ender's Game, and it kind of deals with this concept because it's, we humans are at war, this alien species that look kind of like bugs, and then you find out that like the bugs are basically they're eusocial creatures like ants, so their moral system is based entirely around that. They don't even view, they thought that humans were like them, that there were drones that didn't have like independent moral worth. And so that's
Hmm.
why it was okay to kill them. And they didn't realize that like, no, every human is viewed like a queen, like every human is viewed as an independent thing. And then when they did realize that, they're like, oh shit, we like fucked up pretty bad. And so to
Wow.
me, that just makes perfect sense of like how morality would be structured, and obviously it has to be structured from some kind of evolutionary perspective.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Thal for $20. Thank you so much. Says Thal's rule: all philosophy is derived from a human's need to be argumentative in the face of reality of the thing. I mean, that's true. I don't disagree with that. It's pretty good. Brian for $10 says, do you guys think that our culture being so influential is a fluke? If not, don't you agree that the reason for the popularity is because we were closer towards that moral truth? Yeah, no,
Yes.
I do. Right. But I
Yep.
think I think that comes from evolution. I think that's where the moral truth has to come from. It has to come from evolution or God. So,
Right. Yeah. I totally agree with that.
and from an evolutionary perspective, you say, okay, well, we're better at thriving and reproducing than other cultures. So therefore we win,
Yeah.
and competing, I guess, too. Lucifer Domer for 5 Canadian says, the leader of the PC party is having a barbecue and press conference at my work in 20 minutes. Great show. A team reigns supreme. Really? Well, let us know how that goes.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's
It'd
not
be
too
awesome.
PC. Ryan Owl for $10 says, will you guys cover the whole Winston Churchill was the bad guy of World War II thing spawned by the Tucker Carlson podcast tomorrow? X is more of a hellscape than usual ever since it dropped. So I did actually, right before we started streaming, watch that part of the Tucker Carlson program where, what's that guy's name? Daryl Cooper, the Martyr Made guy is his Twitter account, said that. And I listened to just that part of it, like the whole section, not just the clip. And like I can give like, in the my immediate reaction is like, this is retarded. Like this is massive, massive, massive retardation. It's massive anti-Western liberal propaganda, which is why Tucker Carlson, I guess, drinks it up because he hates. Tucker Carlson has gone on the hating the West
Yeah.
binge, and I think it's only a matter of time before he goes full on quackademic agent. The West is bad, liberalism is bad, monarchy good, or whatever wacky shit he's going to go down.
It's
Um,
supposedly Elon deleted the retweet of it though, which is a step in the right direction, right?
yeah, I am super glad that Elon deleted the retweet, and he also retweeted the community notes which was criticizing this sort of retard. So if you didn't hear it, essentially this guy who I'm not familiar with, I think he's like the co-host of the Jocko Wilson podcast, which I don't listen to. He made this kind of like ridiculous claim that Winston Churchill was the real bad guy of World War II. Now to be fair, he did say like Hitler was bad too, but he kind of did this like weird apologetics where he was like, well, you know, it was bad. Like, oh, he kind of made this apologetics that like, oh, the reason he essentially said like the reason that like the Nazis were holocausting people was because they just captured so many prisoners that they didn't know what to do with them, and they thought it'd be more humane to just kill them all. And I'm like, that's not true. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, because they definitely treated the Jewish prisoners very different than the non-Jewish prisoners of war, right? They
Yeah.
didn't go just rounding up all the French people and burning them in camps. They're like, oh, give us your Jews to kill. Like, so that's completely like that's a complete fucking lie. They also treated prisoners of war very different than they treated Jews and other, the other undesirable groups. So that's completely not true. Plus, you have Hitler's extensive works where he talks about, hating specific groups of people and how they need to be purged from society. And then at the same time, he was like, oh, he's kind of like doing this like disgustingly ridiculous thing where he's like, oh, Germany, after it's like, he's like, oh yeah, Germany didn't want to keep getting into a war with England. England should have just stopped. And it's like, bro, you're like, yeah, once Germany took over like France and Poland and like all of its fucking neighbors, you're like, oh yeah, UK should have just stopped because they wanted peace. Oh, I'm so great, so great. Hitler's so magnanimous that once he takes over fucking all of continental Europe, that the UK and America should just not get involved. Like, fuck you, you fucking cuck. What is this bullshit? And he's like, this guy, he's like bemoaning. This is the most soy cucked bullshit ever. This guy is bemoaning the Allied forces, blowing up Dresden or blowing up other German cities. And it's like, bitch, this is a country that started a war where they're conquering their neighbors and holocausting people. Fuck you. It doesn't matter if they're, oh, you're killing civilians. You have to get these people to fucking stop by any means necessary for the war that they started. Okay. Period. When they stop, we stop. It's so fucking simple. It's so fucking simple. Simple. So it's so weird that there's like this super soy cucked, like leftist kumbaya shit that has now been like picked up by like real weirdos on the far right. So I guess are using it just for, I don't know, just they're using it just for like the purposes of this sort of weird Holocaust or this weird Nazi Germany revisionism. And there was a tweet that someone had a screenshot of. I don't know if it's true or not. And I was actually going to tweet and ask people if it's true or not because I can't find it. So I don't know if he deleted it. Or this guy, he tweeted a picture, this Martyr May guy, he tweeted a picture of the Nazis in France, like when they took over France. And he tweeted a picture of the Olympic, opening ceremony with like the fat people and the trans people like doing the Last Supper thing.
Mhm.
And he tweeted something like, oh, it was better, like things were better when like the Nazis had France, right? Or something to that effect. And I was like, what is this fucking, I couldn't find it. So I don't know if it was real, but I was like, if this is real, then obviously that guy is like massively just, an insane person. So that's not surprising that Tucker would have this guy on his podcast, completely unchallenged him, because as long as he's saying the West is bad, Tucker is gonna, suck that up.
Yeah, people are loving that shit these days,
Right.
which is very sad.
But I didn't want to go and find
The whole thing.
I did listen to the part on Tucker. I didn't want to find, this guy talks about like, oh, I've done all these like 8-hour podcasts on these issues. I didn't want to like listen to what the fuck his excuse was, because I don't know. It's possible that he just, has some very super hyper nuanced take, but that's not at all how it came off on Tucker Carlson. Came off as just purely like UK bad, Nazi Germany good apologetics. So
Yeah, I don't this appeasement stuff during war, I just don't get, but whatever.
yeah.
Like they have to be stopped. So,
Yes. Yeah. No,
yeah.
listen, they took over continental Europe and then you just had to stop, right? Like, why did UK and America have to get involved? We should have just been like, no, just let them have Europe. It's fine. We shouldn't attack them because you're going to kill civilians. Meanwhile, while they're like literally genociding fucking people, it's like, oh, but you can't kill their civilians. Like, fuck
Right.
you. Get out of here, this shit.
Yeah.
So,
It's a big strategic advantage they have if you're
right.
just going to cuck yourself at every turn.
I know. It's so silly. It was so like ridiculous, but I don't know. I don't know if he's like, I don't know if he's like trying to make some sort of if he was trying to make some kind of nuanced argument, he was not even remotely capable of doing it. So Mr. Ubercross for $5 says eating pork is immoral to a Jew. Wearing a hat in church might be immoral. Murdering Hitler is moral. Morality is a personal code, not societal. I mean, that's completely untrue, though. I don't know like, where does that morality come from? It doesn't. If morality is just a purely personal code, how do you derive it? Each individual person derives it from their, their society, from their experiences, from the evolutionary hardware that their brain has sort of warped into them. Like I think people get hung up. This is what Pierre's getting hung up on, is that yes, you as a person can live in a society that has a moral code that you disagree with,
Well,
but that's your moral intuitions, right?
and you're pointing to things that are social conventions on the edge that a lot of people wouldn't contest. Like as soon as you start digging in and start really talking about moral codes like abortion or gay marriage or stuff like that, you really get in the thick of it. Then you can
Right.
really see how it structures society. Yeah. And
Right.
how it can in any way be personal. Like how are the rules around abortion like a personal code?
Well, I guess it just becomes Sitch's law, like definitions, because it basically becomes like, well, you can just define it as your moral intuitions are personal, and the
Right.
societal thing is morality. But then it's like, okay, well, you know, people maybe just don't want to adhere to that definition because there's a lot of like emotional weight that is kind of embedded in the term morality that we all, accept.
Well, it's kind of like saying if I can find one exception, then it kind of negates the entire structure. But I just like nobody would say when we're talking about things like stealing and killing one another,
Hmm.
people don't argue that we're talking about morality, right? They don't, if I say murder is immoral, they agree, right? They're like, yeah, that is immoral. We're talking about morality.
Hmm.
But then you want to go out to some prohibition on eating pork where, obviously people can disagree there and say, okay, well, if people disagree there, then morality is not about social interactions, even though obviously morality is about, or murder is about social interactions. What's going on there, Sitch?
What?
Like it's kind of like the same exact thing people do with the gender stuff. They want to say, oh, because I can point to this one intersex person, that means a concept of male and female is void, right?
Well, I think we want to, as humans, we want to create very specific black and white
Categories. Yeah, exactly.
categories of information and thoughts and, concepts.
Right. But
So,
when I say morality is a set of rules that binds individuals into a cooperative community, a lot of people come out with they're looking for like the intersex person to say,
right.
no, that that's not how it works, right?
Hmm.
When I think the intersex person proves the rule, just like I think like eating pork kind of proves the rule.
Right.
It's the exception that proves the rule. Like, yes, those social conventions are kind of the staging ground for looking for something more important.
Grassroots Hegemon for $2 says Adam is easily the cutest 78-year-old. Look
Well,
at
thank
that.
you. I hope I make it to
Sketch.
78. I really
There
do.
you go. You're gonna make it to 150.
I hope so. Oh my God. What I would give.
Sketch for $2 says common Sitch W, common Tucker L. Yeah, I mean Tucker likes to just rack up the L's. So
Is it just a
uh,
grift? Tucker's so weird.
I don't know, because the only reason I would think maybe I wouldn't want to think it's a grift. The only reason I think is maybe it's a grift is because he's spoken out so fervently against the thing he is now in the past. So it's like, I mean, maybe he just did a massive heel turn for some reason. And also, you have the emails where he's literally shitting all over Donald Trump, and then suddenly magically now he loves Donald Trump. It's kind of like, what's going on here?
Maybe Tucker has a huge gambling problem. And, he lost his job at Fox News. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I've got this huge
Who knows?
amount of expenses,
There you
right?
go. I
But
like that story. Yes.
I just, it makes sense to me. I don't get
to pay off
why
his
Tucker would
gambling
be in
debt.
this situation. What can Tucker really do, right? Other than suck up to Moscow. Like, what do you do if you're a Fox News host that's been fired from Fox News,
I mean, you
right?
could be like Megyn Kelly. You know, she's a very successful podcast, I believe.
Does she? I'm
I
not
think
certain
I
of
yeah,
that.
I thought I heard that it's like one of the most watched ones around. So I don't know. It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell if he's just become embittered with the West because of wokeness. It's hard to tell if he's become embittered with the West because of getting fired and everything. The only reason I would be leaning more towards the grifter stuff is just because of his emails where he was shitting all over Donald Trump, because of his past statements, sort of shitting all over populism and all this other stuff. And it's like if those didn't exist, I'd be like, okay, maybe it was legitimate. But you combine that with the fact that he has a tendency to lie as easily as people breathe. It just, I don't trust the man.
Right. Yeah, I don't either.
M8566 for $10 says there's this reframing of World War II coming. Oh, excuse me, I gotta sneeze.
Uh-oh. That is weird.
It's terrible. False alarm. It's like stuck in me.
That sucks.
There's this reframing of World War II coming now from the part of the right. It's the same thing liberal Hollywood is doing with, quote, your heroes really aren't that great and the villains are just misunderstood. Yeah, that's actually a very interesting framing. It is, the left, they've had for years the whole like the heroes aren't really the heroes, the villains are misunderstood. They've been doing this shit forever. And it is very fascinating. I didn't think to look at it through that lens. This is like the far right version of that with the whole Nazi shit. The Allies are really the bad guys, nonsense. So, Grassroots Hegemon for $5 says weird becoming the common vernacular for super anti-liberal conservative is one of the best examples of the power of marketing. Sitch just said it. Did I? I didn't. Well, if I did call it, listen, when I called that guy weird, I didn't mean it in like the actual sense, not the
Not the
Kamala
new
Harris,
vernacular.
Tim, JD Vance
Can
weird
we not say
sense.
weird anymore?
Yeah, no, I don't
Is
mean in that
weird
sense.
going the way of problematic now?
It. I hope it doesn't. I don't think it will. I think weird is too like it's too common a word to sort of be subsumed into the political rhetoric. So
Yeah, and you'll lose your best most favorite musician of all time.
right. There you
Weird
go.
Al Yankovic.
There it is. What a tragedy. Death by Slot for $2. It says it seemed to me that Pete thought of the word rule as too mundane, something used in games and libraries where he feels morality should be grander and more numerous. I could be wrong. That's just the impression I got.
There's a point in the discussion where he pulls out the 10 commandments. And I'm like, oh my God. Like they're literally called commandments. Like, how can you think the 10 commandments aren't a rule?
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, no, it gotta be. Yeah, I don't look, and it was Sitch's law the whole time over the word rule, but
Right.
I can't think of a better word than rule.
Rasmus Hedemon for $5 says you can tell a pitch works when people internalize it without knowing they're doing it because as normal as the next breath. Dems, well done. Well, I'm going to be honest. It's a little triggering if you keep pushing this, Grassroots, because, and I know you're not intending to be, I 1000% did not mean it in that context, even subconsciously. And if you go back to our streams before, the Kamala campaign ever took weird, you'll see me calling like quackademic agent and the weird, far right fringe stuff as weird. And I've done it for very, very many years. So it is a little triggering for you to be like, oh, well, you're only saying that word now because of the Kamala stuff. I was like, no, you could go back. This is a very common word that, I've used, that Adam's used, that other people have used to describe sort of the hyper autistic fringe elements of both the far left and the far right. So,
Yeah, if you want to go back and look at live streams, I would be curious to see the weird content, like the number of times that we use the word weird. My gut intuition is yes, it's a common word that we use. Obviously, it's a very simple word. It's easy to say. So I would think it's been pretty static throughout the
right.
entire podcast. But I mean, if it ticked up a little bit because people are saying it more in the context of this political season. I mean, I wouldn't even say that that's wrong,
Mhm.
right? So it's a weird thing to get hung up on, right?
It is weird that, yeah. Oh,
I don't know. Problematic was never something I actually said. Like problematic was a word that kind of came to me through the culture war. So it
I
wasn't,
hate that because I used to say
yeah.
problematic and systemic all the time. And
Did
now
you
it's like,
really?
fuck,
Oh,
yes,
wow. Okay. So look,
yes.
they weren't taking anything away from me with that
Well,
word,
see,
but
because they took those words from, like, I forget, there's a phrase, I forget what it is, that we learned in psychology. It's like a way of trying to talk about something without triggering people.
right.
And problematic and systemic were like part of that way, which it gets
Because they
kind of
were
dumbed down.
neutral
And
terms, right?
yeah, like, oh, like the behavior is problematic. Like it's a little bit nicer way of saying like you're being a fucking problem, right? And so they took all those words, I forget what it's called, from this kind of speaking, and they basically sucked it up. And I was like, shit, that's
I love
obnoxious.
systemic dishonesty, man.
That's a good one.
I love it.
Oh, that's my soft said numinous, not numerous. I misread the thing. So there you go. I've never heard this word. Numinous. Having a
Numinous,
strong religious or spiritual quality.
voluminous,
It's numinous, not to be confused with voluminous.
but they're close to the same thing. What was
Well, no,
numinous?
voluminous means there's a lot of it.
Yeah,
Numinous
but
means having a strong religious or spiritual quality, suggesting the presence of divinity.
oh, okay. I thought it was just like numerous,
No,
like a
but I
lot
mean,
of
I would understand why you would think that because
high
it's
in
very
number.
similar.
Yeah,
Grassroots Hegemon Provider says, I'm not knocking you. I just couldn't send a $5 million super chat. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
yeah.
So, okay. Anyways,
Oh, that was great. Great discussion. Thank you, Peter, for joining in. And I guess we're talking tomorrow.
that's right. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Bye bye.